Hey, what's going on, guys? Kalamazi here, and this is going to be my 8.1.5 Affliction Warlock DPS guide. In it, we will be covering Azerite, talents, trinkets, rotations, cooldown usage, and a few other things along the way for both Mythic Plus and Raid settings. If you're interested in any of the weak auras or add-ons you see here, I will place a link in the description to my Twitch where you can find them all. There will be timestamps in the description if you want to jump to a certain part of the video, and I will also place a link to the most recent Blood Mallet Azerite trait sims there as well. Now let's get right into it. Alright, starting things off with Mythic Plus, Affliction does bring with it a good bit of single target damage when using both Dark Soul and Darkglare together. The downside to playing Affliction in Mythic Plus though is its glacially slow ramp up time on Trash, and seeing as how Reaping is this season's affix, it's pretty easy to see why Demonology has become the go-to spec Mythic Plus wise for Warlocks. I will say that both Absolute Corruption and Writhe and Agony's playstyles are fun and engaging. They just sadly don't bring with them any real burst damage like you would see from a Demo Lock or other strong burst classes. In higher settings, however, especially higher fortified keys, where we have time to ramp up and get use out of our Darkglare and DSM, our trash damage does then become much more competitive. Here's the overall generic build from Mythic Plus that I've been running and most everyone else has as Affliction. In the first row, our only actual choice is Deathbolt. Drain Soul is so undertuned at the moment that actually having no talent at all in the 15 row selected is a DPS increase over Drain Soul. Now that's not taking shard sniping and such into account, but it's still a terrible choice currently. Nightfall, while an awesome talent, is sadly undertuned at the moment as well. In the 30 row, we actually have the choice between Writhe and Agony and Absolute Corruption. If you have two or more sudden onset traits, you'll see a stronger gain from Writhe and Agony over AC, but AC is certainly the easier talent to play with, while also bringing with it very similar damage. Seeing as how I don't currently have very many sudden onset pieces, and also taking into account what Absolute Corruption brings with it, I give AC the nod here over Writhe unless you meet the actual Writhe criteria. Keep in mind that you also have to refresh your corruptions every 8 to 10 seconds or so via Seed on Trash if you're running Writhe and Agony. The 45 row is mostly utility, and I typically run with Burning Rush here. However, Dark Pact is also a solid choice in higher keys where you really want the extra damage reduction cooldown. In the 60 row, sadly, our only real competitive option is Phantom Singularity. So the Siege is not what it used to be in Legion, and Vital Taint is just, well, terrible at the moment. Singularity brings with it a decent bit of single target DPS, as well as a bit of AoE damage that can typically be used every trash pack in Mythic Plus. The 75 row is another utility row in a sense, and I typically either run with Mortal Coil or Shadow Fury here. There are certain applications where Demonic Circle can be useful in Mythic Plus, but the CD reduction or incapacitate Mortal Coil brings is very appealing. Now following suit with the other Affliction talent rows, in the 90 row, our only real option here is Haunt. Grimoire of Sacrifice is undertuned and also does not proc off of AoE pulls, which makes it a pretty poor choice, and while Shadow's Embrace might initially seem like the better choice with trash packs, getting multiple targets to 3 stacks and maintaining the debuff is impossible with how many other spells you have to cast and maintain as Affliction. Haunt plays very well with the overall playstyle of Affliction in Mythic Plus as well, and is very strong when it comes to burning down priority mobs. In the 100 row, the vast majority of the time I run with Dark Soul Misery personally, as it provides a very strong damage boost with Darkglare on both bosses and trash alike in Mythic Plus. Creeping Death is technically an option if you don't want to manage the DSM cooldown, and will provide a bit more damage smoothing, but it's more often than not a subpar choice. It is worth noting that if you have both Absolute Corruption and Creeping Death, it does indeed increase the rate at which your corruption ticks, but your corruption still remains permanent on the target. Looking at Azerite traits in Mythic Plus, Racking Brilliance is an amazing all-around trait, as Agony is a spell that Affliction effectively revolves around. It generates a soul shards in addition to proccing Racking, thus providing a very large stat boost while active. Inevitable Demise also works off Agony and can reach some pretty high stacks very quickly when multiple targets are present, thus allowing you to really focus down a priority mob and also providing strong self-healing. We also have Sudden Onset as a very strong option, increasing Agony's periodic damage, which, as mentioned, gains even more power at 2+ stacks running the Writhe and Agony talent. Personally, I prefer the Writhe SO build over the Absolute Corruption one, as I feel it's a good bit more engaging, but I am a bit restricted myself currently due to my actual Azerite gear. Having your Agony's initial application start at 4 stacks instead of 0 is a small plus when it comes to our glacially slow ramp up time on Trash as Affliction as well. Just be sure not to let your Agonies fall. Cascading Calamity is also an option as well, but it's more single target oriented in a sense, as it does require 2 UAs to effectively be applied to one target to proc the actual trait itself. In Mythic Plus, barring there being a priority mob, you're better off spreading your Unstable Afflictions onto multiple targets most of the time for the additional damage bonus it grants you while active. I have played with Calamity in Plus recently, however, and it's not as bad as some may think, but there are certainly better options out there. Stat-based effects such as Treacherous Covenant and Blightboard Infusion are solid as well, but make sure you're aware of Treacherous Covenant's actual downside. As far as trinkets are concerned, you certainly want to try and acquire a Balefire branch from Waycrest Manor as your main on-use trinket. Having a 1.5 minute CD means it will typically line up well with every other Phantom Singularity, and certainly every Darkglare you have. Seeing as how Balefire branch is an on-use trinket, your other one should be an equipped trinket if at all possible. Having 2 on-use trinkets and using one puts the other on a 20-second CD, thus not allowing the use of both of them at the same time. This effectively leads to your second on-use trinket sitting off CD for longer than it should. Trinkets such as Lady Waycrest Music Box, Conch of Dark Whispers, Crest of Paku, and Incandescent Sliver are all solid options, but your best choice will most likely come down to eye level if you have more than one option. It is worth noting that even though a trinket like Music Box might sim higher than your Crest of Paku, it's typically worth wearing a stat-based trinket in Mythic Plus over pure single target ones like the Music Box, barring there being a pretty big eye level discrepancy. When looking at trash damage in Mythic Plus, you typically want to open on a precast Seed of Corruption into Haunt, which will then pop the seed. I typically then hit Dark Soul Misery and apply Agony to all active targets, followed by then swapping back to my Haunt target, tossing Phantom Singularity up, and then begin applying Unstable Affliction to each mob. You can then pop your Darkglare, Balefire Branch, and cast a Deathbolt. Be sure to watch your inevitable demise stacks here if you're running the trait, and be sure your target has both Haunt and Unstable Affliction on it if possible before draining at high stacks. If there is a priority mob in the pack, it's more than okay to dump multiple Unstable Afflictions into that one specifically, effectively following our single target opener. If you're running the Writhe and Agony build, the opener is pretty much the same, but you have to make sure that you refresh your corruption via Agony every 8 to 10 seconds. It is important as well, keep in mind that you will need to bank 1 soul shard to cast your seed, and do also remember that it has a travel time. Now looking at single target talents here, you will most likely start to notice a bit of a trend the further we get into this build. The case is exactly the same for the 15 row here as it is for Mythic Plus. Drain Soul is so horrendously undertuned that having literally no talent in this row is a DPS upgrade overtaking Drain Soul currently. While Nightfall is an awesome effect, it's not in a good place either currently, but Deathbolt plays very well with our cooldown cycles, as well as actually being a strong choice damage-wise. In the 30 row, Siphon Life is going to be the best choice you want to make when it comes to actual pure single target fights. There are certainly cases where both Absolute Corruption and Writhe and Agony are strong choices on fights such as Jadefire Masters, Conclave of the Chosen, and Jaina to name a few, but half the time they're using padding strategies sort of as is. The 45 row is a utility row as mentioned, and the vast majority of the time I've had Burning Rush as my talent of choice here. The additional movement speed it provides is a huge plus in almost every scenario. Moving quickly from one mechanic means more DPS uptime on the actual boss. Just don't forget to turn it off once it's over, or you're probably going to suffer the wrath of your raid healers. In the 60 row, the only choice we have here, once again, is Phantom Singularity. It is effectively the only real single target choice we have in this row, and also lines up well with Balefire and Darkglare having a 45-second cooldown. It does indeed provide a bit of AoE or splash damage as well, if multiple mobs are near one another. As far as the 75 row goes, the vast majority of the time I have and recommend Demonic Circle, as it provides a great deal of utility when it comes to certain mechanics, such as the knockup on Mythic Mechatork, as well as a way to traverse an area quickly if placed well. You can pretty much always find some use on every fight for your demonic circle, barring it being a total patchwork fight. The 90 row brings with it one real option, and that option is, once again, Haunt. You should shoot for as high of an uptime on Haunt as humanly possible, as letting it drop is a significant DPS loss. Haunt plays very well with how the spec actually functions as well, being a strong CD-oriented single target DPS spec. Finally, in the 100 row, for raid encounters, our only real option here is Dark Soul Misery. It's an extremely powerful cooldown in conjunction with Darkglare, and it's a huge part of our burst damage every cooldown cycle. It is worth noting that you should save your final Dark Soul for your final Darkglare basically every boss fight, but it is okay to use on CD every 2 minutes outside of the first one and the last one. At times, you will still want to hold it for Darkglare even if it's not the last set, depending on actual fight mechanics and such, but like I said, it's more or less on a case-by-case basis. As far as Azerite traits go, Racking Brilliance is once again the best overall Affliction-specific choice you can make. It brings with it a very strong intellect proc that does not lose any value at 2 or 3 stacks, which is great basically everywhere. Inevitable Demise is a strong choice for a lot of fights in BOD and beyond, where ads are present as well. In a very similar fashion to Mythic Plus, it can generate many stacks very quickly, which you can then pump directly into the main target, effectively harvesting resources from mobs of lesser importance. Now I do want to note here that, unlike 8.1, we no longer generate stacks of ID while we are actually channeling Drain Life anymore, so there's not as much of a reason to drain below 45 or more stacks, barring a mechanic or something coming that will force you to sit at cap for a while. Cascading Calamity is a very strong choice as well, and the haste bonus it provides is highly sought after, and in a similar sense like Racking Brilliance is, it doesn't lose any value at 2 or 3 stacks. You tend to see a mix of both Cascading Calamity and Inevitable Demise on a good bit of bosses in actual BOD, but there are some fights like Grong or Opulence where Cascading Calamity is a better overall choice, and some like Mechatorque where Inevitable Demise absolutely dominates. Sudden Onset is a solid choice if you're lacking the previously mentioned traits, but unlike Inevitable Demise, Cascading Calamity, and Racking Brilliance, it does lose a bit of value at 2 or more traits because it does not increase the amount of stacks your Agony starts at. Treacherous Covenant is also a very strong option, right up there with Racking Brilliance, but be aware of its actual downside. I do also want to touch briefly on Pandemic Invocation here, and why I didn't really mention it. While Pandemic Invocation does indeed sim well, the trait is just not that practical. Affliction's a very mobile spec, being able to refresh dots or cast certain abilities on the move. Running Pandemic Invocation makes it so that actually refreshing your dots on the move becomes something you don't really want to actively do. Even when I was testing with the trait initially on PTR, I knew that while it did indeed sim well, it was not going to translate over to actual gameplay very well. It's still a decent choice, don't get me wrong, it's just in a very similar situation to where Dagger in the Back is in Sims, being that it's a bit misleading. Our single target opener consists of a precast Haunt into Agony, Siphon Life, and then Corruption. You want to then pop Berserking if you have it, as well as Dark Soul, and cast as many Unstable Afflictions as possible, followed by Phantom Singularity, Darkglare, Balefire Branch, and then Deathbolt. Once you're past the initial opener, be sure to maintain your Haunt as well as your other dots while trying to keep one Unstable Affliction rolling as much as possible to benefit from the bonus damage percent it grants, and then also filling with Shadow Bolt. If you're playing with Cascading Calamity, be sure to refresh it when you can before it falls every 15 seconds. Now I did want to touch briefly on Deathbolt, as I do receive many questions asking about the proper time to use it. You obviously use it in your opener as we just discussed, but outside of that, the only real guideline that I follow is to make sure Agony, Corruption, and Siphon Life are on the target and not in their pandemic window, and to have one Unstable Affliction rolling. Casting multiple UAs does not increase Deathbolt's damage really, as by the time you cast your third or so Unstable Affliction, the duration of your first one is halfway gone, in addition to your other dots' duration being lower. It also throws off the keeping one UA rolling as much as possible rule. I typically begin to pool shards at about 25 seconds before my Darkglare is off cooldown, so I can have a full 5 shard Darkglare. This is typically the only time that I cast Deathbolt with multiple Unstable Afflictions rolling on the target. Pet damage in BFA has been normalized across the board for both Affliction and Destruction, but each pet does bring with it a bit of utility. The Imp brings with it both a small heal for the Warlock as well as Singe magic. The Fell Hunter, on the other hand, brings with it an interrupt on a 24-second cooldown as well as a purge. The Imp is technically the best option when it comes to pure DPS, as it does not have to run between targets when swapping to them, but the DPS difference is very minor. So, for my closing thoughts on Affliction, it is still in an okay place for Mythic Plus, but is really lacking in a few departments. Not having any strong burst CDs is huge right now, especially with Reaping being this season's affix and not infested like last season. The fact that we don't really have any kind of CC outside of Banish also hurts, as Fear can quickly lead to a complete disaster and just can't realistically be relied upon. The time it takes to actually ramp up on trash packs can most certainly be felt in lower keys, and even higher tyrannical keys when running with strong burst classes such as Rogue, Demon Hunter, and LA Shaman, to name a few. Either way, if given enough time and/or with the use of CDs on trash, Affliction's trash damage can be considered competitive, but you won't touch or come anywhere near the higher burst DPS classes. Boss damage in both Mythic Plus and Rating is strong, especially on fights where ID can be cheesed though. I do wish we dealt a bit more damage outside of our cooldowns and weren't as dependent on them as we are, but we aren't in a bad spot by any means. Overall, when looking at its Affliction as a whole, we are certainly much better in raids than we are in Mythic Plus overall, but I guess technically, hey, you can't win them all. As far as stat weights go and actual gear sims, the best way to tell where your own individual character is sitting is a raidbots.com top gear sim. It will take all of your current gear into account as well as other options if selected and give you the highest actual set you have available. Stat weights fluctuate a bit between different characters and often shift a great deal when trying to compensate for one in a stat weight sim, so top gear is the actual way to go. Thanks for watching, guys. I really hope this video helped you all get a better understanding of Affliction in 8.1.5 and heading into Crucible. Let me know what you thought of it and your thoughts on current AF in the comments below. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them there and I'll be sure to get back to you. I will also be releasing my 8.1.5 Destruction Guide in the next few days as well, in preparation for Crucible Storms. If you want to see that and help support the channel, smash those like, share, and subscribe buttons, as your support really helps. I'll also have a link to my Twitch in the description where you can acquire any of the weak auras or add-ons you've seen here. Thanks dudes, and I'll see y'all again soon. Peace.